Teachers of Reddit, what was the best excuse for being late that turned out to be true? Story 1. She had to take her sister to school and drive her mom to rehab. She was always late to class because her mom just wanted to sleep in. The problem was, if the mom was late or did not go, she would have violated her probation and gone to prison. Never marked her late. If she missed anything important, she could come in at lunch or after school to make it up. Story 2. I was one of about 20 kids who were late to school. We showed up at the school office as a group, and when questioned why we were late, we said, "The school bus blew up." They questioned, "So the engine blew up?" The kids, "No, the whole bus in flames, it blew up." There was many conferences between the teachers, all of them thinking we embellished the story. Next thing you know, one of the admin staff has the news website open. A very obvious image of an entire bus on fire with a bunch of kids in our school uniforms standing in front of it. Our late slip for class read, "School bus blew up." If that happened, I would walk home. Story 3. Story time. I was the only high schooler on our school bus one winter. The other detail important to this story is that we had the oldest model bus that wasn't in the best mechanical shape. It had one of those mechanically operated doors. It would shoot out a plume of black smoke every time it started. It just looked much less fancy than all the other buses the school had. Anyway, one winter it was so cold that the diesel engine stopped working. The bus driver said the cold made the diesel and the fuel lines gel up. I have no idea if that's accurate, but either way, the bus wouldn't start. Fortunately, they were only 5 miles from the school and all the kids had been picked up already, so they just radioed another newer bus to loop back around and pick us up. The bus driver had radioed the elementary school but completely forgot to let the high school know. So I show up to class and the teacher asks why I was late. I said, "The cold caused the fuel lines to gel up in the school bus," repeating exactly what the bus driver told us. But I was the only high schooler on the bus, so no other students were there to back up my story. The teacher didn't believe me, and instead of just calling the main office to verify my story, she mocked me in front of the whole class saying, "It's not possible for fuel to freeze in the cold." And everyone in the class agreed with her, saying that I was a bad liar and laughing at how dumb my story was. Ultimately, the office did let her know about the bus after she tried giving me a detention, but the embarrassment is still there and she never gave me an apology. Story 4. Former student here. "Sorry, boss. My stepdad tried to kill us last night and I had to deal with the cops. Professor just looked at me for a moment and said, 'Dude, do you want to go grab a drink and talk about this after class?' Man, my English prof was a bro when I was in college. Stepdad's been dead now for about 8 years. He didn't take care of himself. His alcoholism finally caught up with him. I had to pick the pieces up from what he left behind, and in the process, I learned a lot about who I am and what I can do. It took a few years to get my head straight and learned that life isn't just one big crisis. Lots of time analyzing my reactions and the events I found myself in. Therapy, psychiatric help, the works. I'm in a much better and healthier place, and that event was about a decade ago. I've blossomed into a weird yet passionate and functional adult, a provider for those that need help, and a mentor and a friend. I wish things had been different growing up, but I'm happy with how it turned out despite all the odds. Story 5. I was the kid. Physics, 11th grade. The day prior to this day, my neighbor passed away and our son was a friend of mine, and also in this class. Terribly long story, but it was a by hanging and I was the one who found her. I had nightmares all night and skipped the first half of school the next day. When my physics teacher saw me later, she asked where I was that morning. Before I could explain, she said, "That friend was looking for you and concerned. He seemed more worried than he should have been and was a little upset about you not being there. The guy's mom died, but he still went to class and didn't tell anyone, but was worried about me." I couldn't tell her what had happened at that point, so I just said I overslept. Story 6. Literally today. The child missed my first hour class. Note said car accident on the way to school and that would be coming late. The kid comes for second hour and he has pictures on his phone of the rollover accident. What the kid? Go home. Rest. Take care of yourself. They have another one, although this one happened to a classmate when we were in college training to be teachers. She missed a really important class and came for just the last 10 minutes or so because her neighbor knocked on her door while in active labor, asking for help a little while before she was supposed to leave for class. My classmate walked back to the neighbor's house with a preggo neighbor and delivered her baby in the living room while on the phone to 911. Paramedics came and mom and baby were fine, but the classmate needed to go home and shower and change first because she was covered in blood. Story 7. A kid missed my first period class one morning, but was in school later that day. When I asked him why he hadn't arrived in time for my course, he said his cow was birthing its calf that morning, so he'd picked being in the barn over English. Made sense to me. His essays weren't going to win any ribbons at the county fair, but his calf could. This sentence warmed my heart. Thank you. Story 8. When I was in college, my psych professor told us that the only excuse for being late was a funeral procession. Any other reason, you wouldn't be allowed to come in. A few weeks into the semester, I was headed from one building to another, which involved crossing the main road. Lo and behold, there was one very long funeral procession going by. I got a short video of it as proof, then stood on the sidewalk to let it go by. Unfortunately, the procession made me 5 minutes late to class. I knocked on the door, and the professor came over to start to tell me off. I showed her the video. Well, I'll be damned. Come on in. Story 9. Obligatory not a teacher, but I'm an admin at a music school. I had a mom frantically call me and let me know her daughter would probably be late or miss their guitar lesson in a couple of hours because she couldn't find the kid. I was just kind of like, okay, we'll let her teacher know. Got another call about an hour later from the same mom. She found her kid, but apparently the daughter went to a friend's house and decided to dye her hair green. They lived pretty close by, so I did let them know they could still come in for their lesson. Mom said she would call me back and let me know in a minute or two. Never called back. Her daughter showed up for her lesson about 5 minutes late with this bright green coiffure. I gotta admit it looked rad as hell, but also kind of a confusing thing to be an audience to the build-up. Story 10. I apologize that I'm writing this on mobile, so there might be errors. I'm an English professor, and one year, a pretty good student showed up without one of his 2 major term papers. He explained that his safe had been stolen by a contractor who was working on their house. His laptop was in the safe, and that's where his paper was. I genuinely believe him because he has been a really good student. And over the next few weeks, he started to show up to class looking very tired. He said that he was on a hunt for the person who stole his safe, and he was spending late nights with his cousin driving around looking for the guy because they knew his van. Now the student and his cousin were both recently back from tours in Iraq and had seen combat experience. They wanted to find the guy to beat the crap out of him and get the safe back because his wife's wedding ring was in the safe as well as a bunch of cash. He rewrote the paper and turned it in, apologetic that it wasn't up to his usual quality, but he still kept coming to class looking like he hadn't slept. After a little while, he came very happily to my office hours, and he reported that he found the guy after a long search that involved breaking into a meth den, shaking people down with baseball bats, and even bribing some prostitutes. He said that they found the guy's van at a Taco Bell after getting a tip from a prostitute, and they cornered him and waited for the police to come. I read in the news that he had, in fact, done a citizen's arrest and stopped the guy at a Taco Bell, and that they ended up calling in the Secret Service because he used the cash that he stole from the safe to buy a bunch of counterfeiting equipment. Secret Service apparently investigates counterfeiting, so the whole investigation happened because this guy, who I dub the White Shaft, tracked the scumbag down through the bad side of town late at night to get a wedding ring, some cash, and his research paper back. It all turned out to be true. He got the ring and the laptop back. I gladly accepted his original paper, and he got a much higher grade than the rewrite. I can't recall the year this happened, but it was the height of the war between the US and Iraq. My student had enrolled in the army right after 9/11 and the same day as his cousin. They were both just out of high school and enrolled due to patriotism and frustration. According to him, when he started his Vigilante spree, he actually went inside a house used by meth addicts to try and find the guy. They shook the house down with baseball bats and forced everyone out into the street. When the cops showed up, they told my student how dangerous this was and not to do it again. Then they gave him their cards and said, "But call us if you do." They shook down at least 2 other drug dens, and the same cop was waiting outside both times to arrest people since he didn't need to get a search warrant as everyone was outside now at the point of 2 baseball bats. I told my student how dangerous this all was, and he was very John Wick about getting his wife's wedding ring back. Also, I tried to find a link to the story, but it was a small story, and Google isn't being very helpful, especially since I can't remember the year. Again, thanks for the love and the gold, kind ones. Story 11. Not me, but in my class. This was in college. Student turned in work late after not showing up for 2 classes. 2 classes amount to a full week, so it was noticeable. Professor looked at him and said, "I hope somebody died for you to be this late. Does my dad count?" Honestly, I've always heard you can hear a pin drop and never really thought anything of it. But yeah, you could hear a freaking pin cut through the air after that. Story 12. Not school, but I got robbed at gunpoint and my car stolen the previous night and was talking to cops and detectives until the early hours of the morning. But being the dedicated corporate slave I am, I showed up to work the next day, albeit an hour or so late. Even in public accounting, they understood and even said, "You know, this is clearly an appropriate reason to not come into work, right?" Looking back, I probably should have taken that day off. If anything, this made my coworkers think I'm some crazy person for just brushing the whole incident off as no big deal and coming into work. Story 13. I've told this story before, obligatory not a teacher, but a student. I was constantly late to class in my senior year of high school. I had a depression and was on a 504 plan as a result. For this reason, I was allowed some extra time in the hallways before class to recover from the mental stress of being in class, etc. It was super helpful and yes, a pretty weird 504 plan. One time I was running late and witnessed a car hit a pedestrian crossing the road, severely injuring him. The car drove away. My brother, who was into cars, recognized the car and identified it to me as our neighbor, who was also in my first period. I stopped to help the pedestrian, also a student at the school, because I had some first aid and lifeguard training. I called an ambulance and waited for it to show up. I also called the school and told them that he would be going to the hospital. Yep, pretty nice of me. When I got to school, my brother and I went down to the front office to get a note for tardiness. The admin I called was waiting there. He thanked me, gave me a note, and told me to tell the teacher if there were any questions to call him. My brother told him about the car that he had recognized, that we knew the driver and who that person was. We both went to our classes. I got to the first period late again, and my teacher didn't even want to hear my excuse. I pressed the note into her hand and told her the story anyway. The driver of the car was sitting in the back of the classroom with a guilty look on her face. She looked scared. But my teacher wouldn't stop giving me crap for my lie. I gave up and waited for justice to take its course. For the record, I never lied when I came to class late. I always told the truth. I slept late. I never invoked my 504 plan for that particular class, even though my teacher knew about it and would be forced to accept it. Halfway through class, the administrator entered with a school resource officer and informed my teacher that the student needed to come with him right now for a hit and run. He saw that I was sitting there and thanked me again for my help and for putting another person's needs above my own. Man, it was nice to help that kid, but it was really nice to see my teacher's face go from disgusted at the driver to shocked and disgusted when she realized my story was true. Story 14. This happened to me as a pupil. A very quiet and assuming kid in our class came into German with about 5 minutes of class left. We went to a Catholic school and the teachers were all quite strict and intimidating. Classes were usually silent, especially in junior school. When this boy came into class at the end of the lesson that day, the door flew inwards with such force that the teacher gave an audible gasp. It had been raining heavily outside. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His blazer was dripping and sodden. He had mud caked into his trousers up to his knees and he was breathing heavily. The teacher exclaimed, "Brendan, what happened?" We all stared up at him in shocked silence. This quiet and assuming little boy let out a big sigh and just said, "I took a shortcut," and went straight to his seat. That line became iconic in our school for years afterward. I love this story. The kid came in badass. Story 15. Not a teacher, but my senior year of high school, they were doing construction on the building, and so part of it was completely closed. To make up for the lack of space, there was a vocational school nearby in the district that let us use the extra rooms they did not use. To get to the other school, you could get on a bus, or if your last class of the day was at the vocational school, you could drive over there. I was driving a friend and myself over to the same English class. Traffic gets pretty stop and go at this time as there are a lot of buses and students all going to the same place. The kid behind me wasn't paying attention during one of the stop moments and rear-ended me. Now it was stop-and-go traffic, so it wasn't like any of us were going fast. It was really just a bump. Still, everyone got out to see the damage and make sure everyone was okay. We were all fine. We both had piece of crap cars. We both decided that nothing was significant. May as well get back into the line of traffic and get to class. Bonus, the kid who hit me was also in that same English class. My friend and I walked into class late first. The teacher was known for being a stickler and very snidely says, "You two better have a good reason for being tardy." My friend laughs and I respond, "Yeah, another classmate just rear-ended us on the way here. You can confirm with him when he gets here." So a minute later, he rushes in saying, "Sorry, I'm tardy. I hit him and his friend." The rest of the class laughs. The stern teacher makes us all get down to business. The end. Story 16. The student told me he couldn't do the work because he was delivering oil from 3 p.m. until 11 p.m. in middle school. He wasn't lying. Dad has broken both of his shoulders and one clavicle, so his grandma and pregnant mom were switching off driving. Pretty sure he was doing most of it at night, and he was hooking the tanks to the oil. I called all his teachers and had his workload lightened and got permission for him to come in an hour late each day as he was providing the only income for his family of 8, as he was the oldest. Tutored him so he could pass 7th grade. I paid the cost of oil only for years until I moved out of the area. You're a goddamn hero. Story 17. Not a teacher, but a true story I don't think was believed. So I'm walking to uni after parking my car about a kilometer away from campus with no parking meter. On one of the windiest days I've experienced. I'm walking across an overpass and one of my headphone earbuds falls out. As I reach up to grab the earbud and place it back into my ear, a heavy gust of wind makes me essentially slap myself, knocking my glasses off and they fly over to the barrier onto the road. As I stagger for a moment, I can't find them. Then I notice they're on the road about half a second before a semi drives over them with a handful of wheels on one side. I stand there stunned. Do I just go sit in class? Do I walk back to my apartment maybe 4 kilometers? Do I drive home blind? As I ponder for far too long, I remember attendance is mandatory for marks, so I walked in 10 minutes late, don't unpack anything and just sit there, which leads to a discussion with my professor after class that went splendidly. Story 18. Not a teacher, but my science teacher was hounding me to retake a test after school once, and before she gave me the paper, I stepped out for a phone call. Turns out my parents were getting divorced, and my dad had been arrested because my mother falsely accused him of assault when he filed at the courthouse before her, so had a residence at the house in custody. My teacher found me and thought it was an emotional breakdown because of the test, and I managed to blubber out everything so she vaguely understood while she tried to get me to calm down. I was mostly scared because my mom was a psychopath, and I was afraid she'd literally kill me for telling my dad to divorce her out. Long story short, it worked out and my dad was released and I never had to see her again. Whew. Story 19. A student shows up to class with a head injury with a note to prove it. Chose not to go home because he doesn't want to miss the activity for that day. I teach a college freshman paper writing class. Over the course of the semester, we have 2 workshop sessions where students bring in their drafts and critique each other's drafts. Each one counts for 5% of the grade, and missing it unexcused means forfeiting that 5%. An excused absence makes the other workshop session worth 10% of the grade. Anyway, during the first workshop session, there was a student who I did not expect to be absent at all, but 60 minutes into the class hadn't shown up. The class is 90 minutes long. Normally, I wouldn't allow someone to come in that late, especially to a workshop session. However, he had the best excuse. He gives me this letter from a doctor in the PE department. Turns out he had judo for PE that morning. He was paired up with a more experienced sparring partner who flipped him upside down. He landed on his head, I think. Under symptoms, the note read that he had temporary memory loss and a possible concussion. Under recommendations, it said that he should go home. I asked him why he didn't go home. He said that he didn't want to deal with the complications of missing the workshop. I should note that my class was on the 5th floor of the building with no elevator and high ceilings, so he had already gone up 4 flights of stairs. I didn't want to waste his effort, so I let him push through. He mentioned that he couldn't remember where he put his pen, needed to write comments on classmates' drafts, so I barked at one of his poor classmates to lend him one. Afterward, I went to our faculty room and told them about it. They all called lies. And then I showed them the note, which completely changed their tone. Started accusing me of creating a pressuring classroom environment. Half joking, I think. The judo incident happened in the morning, around 9 or 10 a.m. My class was from 4 to 5:30, with the student arriving at 5-ish. In the time between the incident and the student arriving late to my class, he was able to rest, regained his memories, although possibly not totally since, again, he couldn't find his pen, and was cleared from having a concussion by a doctor. The doctor wrote the note to explain why he would miss classes because the recommendation was that he go straight home, which would mean taking public transport for about an hour. However, the student decided he might as well attend what was left of the class. He was still wearing the judo pants. He did a good job critiquing his classmates' works, by the way. Story 20. Told me he got pulled over by the cops for wobbly driving on his bike and they thought he was drunk. Turned out he was just dodging all the slugs on the street. Did he tell them he was sluggish?